In this section, let's talk about naming conventions. Naming conventions are super important for every department. A studio's whole pipeline setup usually starts from a proper naming convention. And for rigging in particular, keeping a consistent naming convention is even more critical. During the rigging process, we often need to create tons of nodes, sometimes even hundreds or thousands. With clear names, we can instantly understand what each node does. But if we skip naming, whether we check it later ourselves or hand the file to someone else, we'll waste a lot of time and effort just figuring things out. Also, once we have consistent naming convention, it becomes much easier to search objects in a scene. And even later, when we start writing our own tools or scripts, having a solid naming convention makes everything smoother. So for every node created in Maya, even if it's just for quick test, and we only make 1 or 2 nodes, we should still follow the proper naming convention. That way, we build good habits from the very start. Every studio usually has its own naming convention, but overall, they all follow a pretty similar idea. A complete name convention usually includes a few key parts. The first one is the type. One thing to note here, when we say type here, it's not the same as Maya's internal node type. It's more like a functional category we define ourselves. In some cases, it overlaps a bit with Maya's node types. For example, for polygon meshes, we usually shorten it to mesh. Or for curves, we might write CRV, short for curve. And for joints, we just use J and T. But there are also some types that share the same Maya node type, but in rigging, we use them in a special way. So we define new custom type for them. A common example is the controller. If we've seen other rigging tutorials before, or worked with rigs while animating, we probably know a controller is basically just a NURBS curve. But we need to tell these curves apart from other ones, since they're used specifically as controllers. So here we define a new custom type, which we call control. It's not actually one of Maya's built-in node types, it's just a category we define ourselves. So keep that in mind. Next, we have the side. This one is pretty easy to get. It's just left, center, and right. For example, we can shorten them like this left becomes L. And for the middle, I usually use the word center, so I shorten it to C. And for the right side, we just use R. We can also add extra info here, like left front, right back, or center top, and so on. Next, there's a part mainly used for models called level of detail, usually shortened as LOD. We've probably seen this term quite often. So we know that for final rendering, we usually use high-res models, which have a lot of details. But high-res models also mean heavy geometry. If we use them directly for animation or previews, the scene can get really slow. That's why when animating, we usually switch to the low-res model, then swap back to high-res for rendering. So here we'll have different levels of detail. For example, we often say high-res, which I usually shorten to HIG. For mid-res, we write MID, and low-res is low. We may also see some special-purpose LODs used in production. A common example in character effects work, we often use meshes for cloth simulation. These are usually called tech meshes. So for that, we might shorten it as TCH. Next, we have description. It describes what the node actually does. For example, the head or the hand, and we can go even more specific, like hand IK, hand FK, and so on. We can add all kinds of detail here to make the description as clear as possible. And finally, there's the index. Usually when everything before is the same, we use the index to tell them apart. Like the first spine joint, the second one, the third one, and so on. Usually, the index has 3 or 4 digits. For example, from 001 to 999, or from 0001 to 9999. In most cases, we try to distinguish nodes using side and description. Only when those can't make it unique, we then use the index number. Unless there's a special reason, try to avoid using very large numbers like 999, for example. Too many similar names will just clutter up the scene, and you'll lose track of what each node actually does. We know that Maya doesn't allow spaces in names, so we'll need to use underscores to connect words. Here, we can choose to use a single underscore or a double underscore. If we use a single underscore, then within each section, we have to make sure no other underscores appear. For example, in the description part, we mentioned hand FK. We should write that as hand FK or hand IK. we'll use capitalization to separate each word. In this course, we'll use double underscores to connect each section. Then inside each section, if we need more detail, we can use single underscores. For example, the side part says something like left top. We can write it as L, then a single underscore, and for top, we use 3 letters TOP. Or for right front, we can use R, and for front, also use 3 letters. We abbreviate front to F and T. Or, like in the description, we mention hand IK or hand FK. We can write that as hand FK or hand IK. Now, if we put everything together, say for a left-hand FK controller, according to our naming convention, it would be control, then double underscore, then L, double underscore, hand FK, then double underscore again, and finally a 4-digit number 0001. Or let's say the right front foot high-res mesh. We can write it as mesh, double underscore, R underscore, F and T, then double underscore. And since it's a model, we'll add level of detail. It's high-res model, so we add HIG for high. The next is foot, followed by double underscore and 0001. Each company's naming convention basically uses these same parts, just written differently or arranged in a different order. For example, some might put the type at the end and use uppercase letters for the type and the side. Let's write one out as an example. Uppercase L, then hand FK, then 001, and finally uppercase control. So that would be another naming convention. It might look a little different, but the idea is actually the same. You can follow the same idea to come up with your own naming convention. Alright, let's back to Maya and take a look. Once we rename all the objects in our scene according to the naming convention, it will really help with searching or quick selection. As you can see, my scene has lots of different objects. If you look in the outliner, you can see that I've renamed everything following the naming convention. Let's take a quick look here. First of all, they are all polygons. The type is all mesh. Then based on their positions, we have distinguished them as, for example, front left, back left, front right, and back right. We've also named them by level of details. Some have fewer faces, so they are named as low, and some have higher poly counts, so they are named as high. The description part is named based on color here, and finally, each has an index number. Now a quick and common way to select objects in Maya is through the top right menu bar. Left click there and we'll see a drop-down. Choose Select by Name. Then for example, we can copy and paste the name here. Press Enter, and it'll select that exact object. But of course, we can do a lot more than just copy and paste. For example, if we want to select all front left objects, we know that all our objects start with mesh, then double underscores, then front left, written as LFNT. We might not know which LOD it has, so we can use an asterisk instead, meaning match anything. Then another double underscore. We also don't know which color description it uses, so again we use asterisk here. And we don't know the index either, but we do know it is 4 digits long. So we want to make sure there are exactly 4 characters. It could be numbers or letters, doesn't matter, but it must be 4 of them. Instead of an asterisk, we'll use question marks as placeholders. Let's type 4 of them and hit enter. Now you can see, Maya instantly selects all the front left objects in the scene. With this method, we can do many different kinds of operations. For example, let's say we want to select all the low-res models. Now we've selected all the low-res models, or maybe we want to select all the objects on the right side. We know that objects on the right start with R, but we don't really care what comes after it, whether it's front or back. So here we can just use an asterisk. Same thing, we don't care about the level of details, we don't care about color, but the number is still 4 digits. That way we can select everything on the right side. Or let's say we want to select all the red ones. We just change the description to red. Now we've selected all the red objects. Or maybe we want to select everything with the number 3, that's 0003. This way, we've selected all objects with index 3. So as you can see from these simple examples, once everything in our scene follows a consistent naming convention, it becomes much easier to find exactly what we need. So I hope we can have a good habit from now on in our exercises. No matter if we are creating one node or hundreds or even thousands of nodes, always name them properly following the naming convention. That will make our later rigging process much easier. So that wraps up our section on naming conventions. Hopefully through this lesson, we now have a better understanding of naming convention. See you in the next video.